We've all experienced stress over the last couple of years. All of us have struggled. Some of us have struggled a little, and some have struggled a lot. Today, we want to find ways to experience well being and hope even in the midst of stress. And we also want to find ways to find help for ourselves or for others if they need it. Hi, my name is Tim Denney. I'm from Crookston. I have a business called Level 5 Services, and I do mental health training, well-being training, and a bunch of other topics as well. And I want to invite you today to sit with me for a few minutes while we talk about stress, while we talk about the impacts of stress, and how we can find well-being, hope, and help when we need it. So what is stress? Stress is an emotional and a physical reaction to the internal and external triggers that come to us in our everyday lives, and especially that come to us when things are really difficult. Stress is a normal response to conditions that we perceive to be threatening to us. Those threats may be real or imagined, but in the moment, the brain tells the body that it's under threat. And that threat can be the same, whether it's something as real and disturbing as, say, losing control of our car while we're driving, or meeting a bear in the woods. Or it could be the family coming over for Christmas and we don't feel like we're ready for that. Or perhaps it's work, or perhaps it's fear related to the pandemic or to what's going to happen to our jobs or our income. Perhaps it's stress related to things that are happening at school. In all of these areas, the stress response system in our bodies manages them the same way, whether it's the COVID-19 stress, the school stress, the work stress, the holiday stress, the bear, or the losing control of our car. It's one system. And that system activates temporary physical, mental, and emotional changes in us that help us to navigate these threats, that help us to meet the challenges and to overcome the difficulties. So stress can be useful. It's why we study for tests. It's why we clean the house before company comes over. But stress can also be harmful to us. And harmful might look like some of these things that we're going to talk about here for a moment. When the reactions become a pattern, when the temporary becomes permanent for us, then that's a harmful thing. And for many people, stress becomes not just a reaction to a short-term difficulty, but it becomes a pattern in their lives. And that can be really difficult. The reactions then are there every single day, and that can lead to great difficulty. Also, it's harmful to us when our reactions begin to interfere with our functions and with our relationships. That's always very difficult and harms us in the short term and the long term. It's harmful to us when it interferes with our health and when it creates behavioral problems. Some people deal with stress by checking out. Some people deal with stress by overeating. That's actually one of the most common ways. Some people deal with it by using substances. Those substances could be food, like we just mentioned, or tobacco, or alcohol, or other drugs, or TV, or checking out into books, or doing all kinds of things. And those take us into the realm of unhealthy coping strategies. When we begin to self-medicate our stress with external things, that's not a happy sign for us, and we want to begin to get help for that. We've gone through 20 months of unending threats and challenges and difficulties that we weren't really expecting. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to significant disruptions for nearly every one of us. It's disrupted every community. School is different. Work is different. The home life and work life connection, the home life and school life connection has been disrupted. All kinds of things have been added to our lives that we weren't expecting, and a number of things that were important to us were taken away. Some of us have experienced a disease, and it's been pretty scary. Some of us have lost loved ones and others that we know, and that's been very difficult. And despite the early promises, so far the pandemic is not abating. And now we have compounding circumstances that make it difficult as well. Whether it be politics or supply chain disruptions or the economic impacts of this ongoing event, the threats that we have to our own sense of peace and well-being, the loss of hope, so many other things have happened to us in the last 20 months. And we're not done yet. Many people are stressed. They're fatigued right now. In fact, we have terms for these. We're calling it COVID stress and COVID fatigue. And some people are experiencing significant loss of hope in this time. So let's talk a little bit about how stress, like pandemic stress or like all the other stressors we've been talking about so far, how these affect you. So stress, especially if it's chronic stress, if it's that all day, every day kind of experience for us, they can contribute to or exacerbate the following physical issues that are going on in our lives. Pain. If we have chronic pain in our lives, or we may experience new pain because of the stress, it can exacerbate heart disease and digestive problems for us. It can lead to weight gain or weight loss. It can lead to chronic difficulties in our digestion. It can lead to obesity through binge eating or through substance use. Again, coping strategies that we adopt to deal with our stress. It can lead to sleep disruptions. And when we're more tired, we experience more fatigue in our lives, then we tend to eat more poorly. We tend to compensate more and to come up with poor uses for what could be even good coping strategies. And all of this together begins to age our body's systems. It actually begins to impact our DNA, and it impacts our immune system, which predisposes us to getting sick. So these are all things that chronic stress over time can do to us. Our bodies were made to handle stress in doses, in short term, and stress can be useful in those situations. But if it goes on and on and on, then these other difficulties begin to accrue. And I just want to point out that stress is not what happens to us. It's our response to what happens to us. And that response is something that we can choose. Stress comes to us when we react to the triggers that are in our environment. And we want to keep that in mind, that we can choose those responses. So stress can worsen a number of things that are going on for us. If we already are anxious, if we may have an anxiety disorder, stress can make that worse. It can magnify the impacts of our anxiety. Stress can also feed or contribute to depression in us. Stress over time can be a causal factor for depression, or if we're already somewhat depressed, it can deepen that depression over time. Many people have trauma history. They may have had early childhood trauma. We know that if people have had a number of childhood adverse experiences, these adverse childhood experiences, by the way, are called ACEs. Perhaps you've heard that term. But if we've had a number of those, say 4 of the 10 that they've been studying, that can have significant impacts upon us. And stress can exacerbate those impacts. So a history of trauma, either in childhood or in adulthood, it could be post-traumatic stress disorder from things that we've experienced, perhaps accidents or other difficult events, or having been in combat, or having had significant family disruption. All of those things may predispose us to respond more negatively to stress triggers in our lives. Stress can worsen any substance use difficulties that we're already having because it's so easy to ramp up our self-medication. So these are areas where stress can definitely affect us. Cognitive changes and vulnerabilities also may impact us. In fact, you've probably noticed that when you're under a lot of stress, you tend to forget things. Like you walk into a room and then you can't remember what you walked in there for. Maybe it's 3 days to Christmas and you're trying to get everything ready and starting to do food prep for the family and all of these things, and you leave the kitchen and you walk into the living room, and when you get in there you stop and you say, what did I come in here for? Or you lose your keys, or you lose the shopping list. All of these things are normal reactions in the brain to stress. What do? We think that we now have some kind of dementia because we're forgetting stuff, and that only deepens our stress, right? So we want to be aware of the fact that stress causes cognitive changes in us. Temporary stress leads to temporary changes. If you already have some cognitive vulnerabilities, if you already have, say, age-related cognitive decline because maybe you're in your 70s or in your 80s, stress can make that worse. So we want to be aware of that as well. And then for some people, panic attack symptoms may be in place. I was just reading research yesterday about how people, as they've been coming out of, so to speak, hiding because of the pandemic, they're experiencing what we call social anxiety disorder, where they get into a place full of people and they begin to have panic-like symptoms, and it's related to their fear of the pandemic. So panic attack symptoms can follow significant stress. So what should we look for? Let's say we think that maybe we have too much stress in our lives and too much is going on and we're not responding well. What would be the warning signs of that? Well, certainly, we just talked about these. Memory problems or the inability to concentrate, that could be a warning sign. Making poor judgments, particularly impulsivity, or possibly angry responses to things that don't normally make you angry. Seeing things only as negatives, where we sort of get that negative outlook on everything. We sort of become a little grumpy and more pessimistic than we usually are. Maybe anxiousness and worry, and we begin to worry about things that we normally wouldn't worry over. We begin to worry about finances, and we worry about things in the future, which of course we have no control over. We may even begin to worry about things in the past, which, once again, we have no control over. It's like this sign here on the slide. What do I say? What could possibly go wrong? Anxiety answers that for me. I'm glad you asked. And now we start the conversation of what could go wrong. So those are some cognitive warning signs. There are also emotional warning signs and symptoms that we can look for. By the way, signs are what you see in another person, and symptoms are what you experience yourself. So signs and symptoms may be the same thing, but it's who's looking at them that makes the difference. If I see them in you, they're signs. If you see them in yourself, they're symptoms. So here's a few emotional signs and symptoms to think about. Moodiness, irritability, short temper. I was helping a lady with packing up her car for a flood in 2008. They'd put us on a flood warning down in Crookston. The dikes around the neighborhood in which I lived at the time had not been completed, and they were expecting the river to possibly overtop the weak sections in the dike. And so I was going around the neighborhood looking for people to help. I'd gotten all of my stuff sort of organized, and this lady, I saw her, she was my neighbor, she was carrying this big load of clothes out to the car. She was obviously in a hurry and looked pretty stressed. So I walked up to offer to help. She didn't see me coming. And I said, "Hey, do you need some help?" Just as she ducked into the car with this load of clothes. She tried to stand upright. Of course, she hit her head on the entryway to the car, dropped the clothes in the mud, turned around, swore at me, waved at me. I'll let you figure out what waving was about. And then she turned and stomped off and left the clothes in the mud. Now, she was not normally like that, but she was under a tremendous amount of stress. I picked up the clothes and put them in the car. Her husband said, "Perhaps now's not a good time to offer to help." and I walked on to help someone else. It could be agitation, inability to relax. This may go along with the sleeplessness. Some people, when they're under stress, they talk about laying in bed at night and they're not able to sleep, and then they sort of take an inventory of themselves and they realize that their back is arched up off the mattress. They are so tensed up. They may have clenched their fists. Their legs are locked straight at the knees. That's not a good way to sleep. So we may have this inability to relax. We sit down and try to relax with the book, but we're distracted and we're up and doing things again. Feeling overwhelmed. We may feel like that we are beyond our ability to cope with all of the stressors that are in our lives. And that may make us inattentive to others. We become focused on the things we're working on. And we don't pay attention to the people around us in the way in which we should. I love this picture. That's not a happy looking bluebird. No, it does not look like the bluebird of happiness. And that's what we can look like when we're under significant stress. But there are physical warning signs and symptoms as well. Constant tension, always wound up. Aches and pains. You know, when you're tense like this and you're knotted up, you begin to notice it like in neck pain, shoulder pain, lower back pain, muscle aches in various places. Because it wears out our immune system, we may over time begin to have more frequent illnesses. We're more susceptible to colds, to the flu, hopefully not to COVID-19. It interferes with our ability to digest our food, and that may lead to diarrhea or constipation. It can lead to nausea and other sickness feelings. Dizziness or vertigo can happen. Our brain energy is sapped into managing the stress so much that we may actually experience these warning signs of sense of dizziness or even vertigo. People will feel like the room is tilting up on edge and they need to just stop and sit down. By the way, if that ever happens to you, you can control that by just being mindful in the moment and paying attention to the people and the things in the room around you, and focus on those for a while, and that helps you to leave your stress behind. Sleep disruptions, we've talked about that a little bit, and also the ongoing fatigue that will produce in us. These are physical warning signs and symptoms. So some of these warning signs and symptoms could have a physical or a medical cause. So if you've noticed these in yourself over time, you might want to talk to your doc or to your medical provider and ask them, tell them what you're experiencing and let them talk through some questions with you to see if they can get to the root of what's going on. Could be a really good thing to do. Some other things to look for: stress, fatigue, anxiety, and or depression. They can all gang up on us at a time like this. And that, when they gang up on us, that can lead to things like there we go. It wasn't working. It can lead to increase in substance abuse. It can lead to, even if it goes on long enough, to having thoughts of suicide or even making suicide attempts. These are very serious warning signs right here. So with substance use, we want to look for increased use over time. And we want to be aware, are you or the person you're concerned about, are they becoming preoccupied with the use of substances? Let's say it's alcohol. Do they begin to plan for their alcohol use for the day? Are they talking about it more? That might be preoccupation. Do they need more of the substance when they are using to get the response that they're looking for? And is the use beginning to interfere with their activities or their relationships or their responsibilities? If those things are happening, if some of those things or all of those things are happening, now we're moving into the realm of what we call a substance use disorder. And if it's new, if this is a new thing for you, now's the time to get help, because the sooner you go for help for this, the easier it is to respond to it. So what do we look for in the area of suicide? Here's some warning signs to think about in yourself or other people. If anyone is talking about suicide or making suicidal statements, that's a very clear warning. And we want to take action on that pretty quickly. But most time people don't talk about it openly, at least early on. They give us coded clues about suicide. They may say things like, yeah, sometimes I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. Sometimes I wish all of these problems would just disappear in my life all at once. They may give us some coded messages. They may say things like, this stuff's been really hard, but I don't think I'm going to have to worry about it much longer. Those are coded messages for us, and we want to remember that when people say those things, they're really not they're really not trying to hide the fact that they're having these thoughts. They're actually inviting us to help them. They may also give away possessions, important things to them. They may find ways to say goodbye, either in a note or a Facebook post, or even saying goodbye to people, or giving away things that we know are important to them. Other things to look for are acquiring the means for a suicide attempt. That could be a weapon or ammunition or a rope or extra medication. Those are things that we want to pay attention to. And then also pattern changes. By that, what we mean are somebody stops taking care of things that were really important to them. They used to not be an angry person, but now they seem to be very reactive and angry, or very anxious. They maybe in the past they were a moderately hopeful person, and now they can only talk about feelings of hopelessness or helplessness. Maybe there's this new pattern where they're talking about not feeling like they have any worth in the world anymore. Those pattern changes are things that we want to pay attention to. Those could be warning signs for having thoughts of suicide. And then finally, getting their affairs in order. This could be writing a will, writing a note, checking up on insurance, doing different things like that. Those are all in the category of getting affairs in order. If you see one of these things, there's some cause for concern. If you see more than one, then that cause ramps up pretty quickly. So what do we do? Whether someone is struggling with just extra anxiety, or maybe some pattern changes in their life, or maybe substance use, or maybe we're concerned that they have extra anxiety, more depression, maybe they're having thoughts of suicide, the responses are the same, and they're very simple. We just ask. We can frame that by saying, I've noticed some changes in you lately. You seem more sad, you seem worried a lot, and you don't seem to have hope anymore. Can you tell me what's going on in your life? I'm really concerned about you, and I want to hear what you have to say. So ask about it sooner rather than later. And then when you ask, make sure that you've made some time, because you want to listen. We're not here to fix anything. We're here to let them tell their story. When we tell our story, it's therapeutic. We feel better. We get things, so to speak, off of our chest. And when we listen well to that without trying to fix it, that builds trust, and it creates a bond that may help us help that person. So we just want to listen, and we want to hear the story, maybe ask a few questions to draw out some more of their feelings. And once they've told us their story, we want to thank them for that. And then that brings us to the third thing that we want to do, and that is we want to get them help. So if somebody might have thoughts of suicide, don't wait. We want to get on that one right away. But maybe they just, we can ask that question, by the way. It's a hard question to ask, but we may say it this way. Sometimes when people have been struggling like you've been struggling, they want to give up. and they may have thoughts of suicide. Are you having those thoughts now? Are you thinking about suicide? So we ask that question. If we got it right, the person is not going to be put off by that or embarrassed by it, maybe a little embarrassed, but mostly they're going to feel relief. The research tells us that most people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide are hoping someone will ask them. And when we do, it brings great relief. And then we just go back into listening mode. Tell me what brought you to that point. And we let them tell that story again. If they aren't having thoughts of suicide, they're not going to be angry at you. You just took a huge leap of faith. You took a risk. You showed that you cared. And they're going to be grateful for that. And so then we move on from there to find out what the struggle is in their life. If you need help for this, there are crisis lines that can help you. In our region, we have a crisis line that you can access by telephone 24 hours a day. It's 800-282-5005. 800-282-5005. And when you call that number, you'll talk to a trained crisis counselor who will begin to help you with unpacking whatever the situation is. You may not have a suicidal crisis. It may be a crisis related to any number of things. It could be bullying or addiction or drug use or feeling isolated and alone or sadness, or you have a decision that you have to make, or you think that you're being abused, or that you have this interest in self-harm, or it could be any of those things. At any crisis line, they want to help you with that. Maybe it's relapsing in your substance use recovery. They want to help you with that. So use the lines. The crisis text line is another one that you can use. You text the letters MN to 741-741, and you'll be connected to a trained crisis counselor who will start a text conversation with you. And they also want to deal with any crisis that's a crisis to you. So remember that if it's a crisis to you, it's a crisis to them, and they want to help. Now, one other thing that you can use this line for is maybe you are dealing with a person and you don't know what to do next. You want to help them, but you don't know how. You can call or text the crisis line, and they can help you with that. If the risk is immediate, you feel like someone's in immediate danger of self-harm, if you feel maybe they've already overdosed or something like that, and you're concerned for their immediate safety, then please call 911. It's not a crime if you're in crisis. This is not a criminal matter, but law enforcement may respond to do a wellness check, and then they can help you sort out the best path for helping this person. I do a lot of training with law enforcement on how to respond to people in these situations. And I know that many of the law enforcement professionals in our region, all they want to do is help keep people alive and get them to the best possible help that they can. So feel free to call 911 if you feel like there's an immediate risk. You can help others get help through some other ways. Informal supports are really helpful. Finding what worked for a person in the past and then helping them connect to that again. It could be a family member, a pastor. I think that's a great resource that we sometimes overlook. Someone else from the church, someone else from the community, a coworker, a longtime friend, an extended family member. So find those connections. Help people to get reconnected to their church if they've walked away from it. Help them to reconnect with friends. Help them to tap into community events. If they've been isolated, especially over the last 20 months, and they're trying to break out of that, help them. Maybe go with them to do some things and get them connected. And then stay connected to them. Call, stop in, check up on them. Listen more every day if needed. Let them tell more and more of their story, because there's therapy in that. Well, Newfolden cares. What we're trying to do with these efforts that we've been putting together here are to create awareness of the needs and the warning signs. We want to give community members skills and resources so that they can help themselves, or they can help someone else who's in need or even in a crisis. We want to empower community members to ask, to listen, and to get help for themselves or for their family members or for anyone else who's struggling with too much stress, with emotional or behavioral health difficulties, or even with thoughts of suicide or self-injury. And this is a big one. We want to reduce the stigma around these conversations. You know, we all have health and we all have mental health. And we all have health difficulties from time to time, and we all have mental health difficulties from time to time. So we want to make it okay to talk about whatever it is we're struggling with, even if it's something really difficult. And we want to make it okay to share. And we want to keep it confidential, and we want to help the person get to the help that they need as soon as possible. Remember that the sooner we get to help, the sooner we get to recovery. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening. I hope that this has been useful to you. I hope that you found something in here that will help you with whatever situations you're in. And I just really appreciate you giving me the time today. Remember, Newfolden cares, and help is just around the corner.